Who do you think you are? You've probably heard of a show by that name, Who Do You Think You Are? I'm not sure whether it's still being made, but there was an English version, an Australian version, and I'm pretty sure there was a US version as well. Each episode traces the genealogy of a celebrity, and this undoubtedly reflects the increased interest that people have in tracing their ancestry, in determining where they came from. And I see ads for this all the time on TV. The desire to discover our genetic and social heritage is quite understandable. We're trying to place ourselves, our lives, within a context. And accompanying this quest is a deep conviction that we carry our past around with us, which is certainly true to some extent, both at the social and genetic level. Of course, we're actually the result, each of us, of the combination of thousands upon thousands of genetic pasts. And the influence of any single one of those on our life here and now is likely to be very, very small. So, if our great, great, great grandparent was a writer, anything in their genetics that influenced them in that direction will be extremely diluted in us. After all, we have 32 great, great, great grandparents. The strongest influence on us is much more likely to be our immediate environment as we're growing up. Now, separating nature from nurture is always extremely difficult, if not impossible. Nevertheless, I like to think the fact that I read almost certainly comes directly from the fact that my father always used to love to read rather than to some gene I happen to possess. There are two things that strike me as interesting about this quest to ground our lives or uncover some imagined truth about ourselves via genealogy. The first is the insatiable desire that human beings have to explain things. If I'm a writer, I want to ask the question, well, why? And if I discover that one of my forebears was a writer, then I think that I've somehow explained this, explained something about myself. I haven't, of course. Why am I a writer, for example, rather than, say, an undertaker or a grave robber, as one of my ancestors may well have been? We pick and choose among the building blocks of our past. We pick and choose those things that most appeal to us as an explanation for who we are, and we set aside those that we're not too keen about. But why the need for an explanation anyway? The actual explanation may be much more proximate and mundane, but does it really matter? I make of myself what I am from the building blocks available to me, including any genetic origins or any educational input or social influences. But ultimately, I'm a writer because I am a writer. I have chosen to be that, not because my great, 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 etc. grandfather was a writer. The second point is related to this. We're constantly seeking not just an explanation for things, but the meaning of things. Well, what's the difference between an explanation and a meaning? Explanation looks at cause and effect. In snooker, the red ball moves because the white ball strikes it, and the white ball moves because the cue strikes it. In genealogy, we're inclined to argue, first of all, in terms of cause and effect. I'm a writer because my great 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 grandfather was a writer. But we add to this something extra, something very human, namely the concept of meaning. In our eyes, the knowledge that our forebear was a writer makes our own choice to be a writer somehow more understandable, more meaningful, more significant in our eyes. We see it as evidence of some kind of pattern or shape or purpose unfolding in events. In an almost mystical sense, it brings our ancestor forward into our lives. We're continuing something that they started. And now we can see that there's been a sort of shift in the argument here. The fact that both my ancestor and I are writers gives meaning not to my life, but to their life. I'm keeping something of that ancestor alive, validating it, affirming it, even if I'm doing those things unknowingly. The fact that I now know it, that I'm conscious of the connection, brings them back into the world. It brings them into the present to live on in some small way in me. I'd like to think that my descendants at some time in the future will help to keep me alive in this way too.